I'm conscious that I'm the last speaker, so first of all, well done to everybody for staying. I didn't think there'd be anybody in the room when I stood up here, so well done. I have a 20-minute presentation that I will try to give in 15, but being me, it'll probably take 25, so apologies before I start. This is actually a follow-up to a presentation I gave 4 years ago, which was also titled Delivering Projects Through Market Change. When I delivered it 4 years ago, I didn't actually present on that. I was asked to sort of represent the supply chain in a forward look at REFIT 2 and the challenges associated with delivering the REFIT 2 proposition at the time. So I thought it wise to look back at what I presented 4 years ago and to some degree look back and to some degree look forward. So Gail has already explained all of this wonderful stuff. It was interesting actually looking at the slides from 4 years ago and looking at how we've progressed since then. Obviously a lot of things have happened for the company. I'd like to think they're all positive. I suppose the proof of the pudding will be what happens next, as always. But it's certainly been a successful time for us, as it has been for a lot of other people in the supply chain, a lot of whom are in the room. We'll touch on some of the things later on. Certainly one of the big things for us more recently has been opening the office in Scotland. And we don't really like to talk about it, but in case anybody did miss it, and in case anybody missed Gail mentioning it, we were very fortunate to win Consultant of the Year a couple of weeks ago. So I think that gave us a sort of a reassurance that what we did do through REFIT 2 and prior to that has been recognised by our peers. And for a company like us, that's more important than anything else. So 4 years ago, that's what I looked like. It's obviously been a very tough 4 years looking at that photograph and looking at me now. Fortunately, back then we were Win Prospect Ireland, so the colour scheme and everything was different. So as I go through the presentations, I'll show some of the slides from back then, and it's very easy to differentiate between the 2015 slides and the 2019 slides. So as I said, we were asked to look at the challenges facing the supply chain back then. And I suppose when I was asked to present today, I did ask myself, well, is a sequel to that appropriate? And I felt it was for a number of different reasons. I suppose the key reason was, at the time, and it can be very hard to remember 4 years ago in an industry like ours, but there was a particular concern that the supply chain wouldn't be able to deliver what was being estimated for REFIT 2. And we will see later on what those figures were. And it was a challenge that was put to us by the development community to see could we step up to it. These concerns were very, very valid. There's a lot of concerns being expressed today in a slightly different context. But back then it was all about, we've all worked so hard to get the industry to this point, don't fail now. And I think a number of us felt some responsibility to deliver on behalf of everybody. I have a little bit of a concern, and funny enough, some people said it to me outside, that there doesn't seem to be the same concern being expressed at the conference and at other conferences about the impact of what's happening post-REFIT 2 on the very same supply chain that stepped up over the last 4 years. So the question, and I don't propose to have the answer today, but it is a question, how will the supply chain deal and survive? Well, we can all use different words as to what's going to happen next. I think it's going to be a contraction. I don't think it's going to be a pause in any way. I think it's just going to be a contraction and a change. I think the big thing is change more than contraction. Rightly, most conferences focus on the development environment because that sets, state the obvious, it sets the environment within which things happen. But I think once things do happen, it's up to the supply chain to deliver. And what we shouldn't lose sight of is what makes a successful industry is actually delivering things. It's not setting up the environment in which it's delivered. It's actually doing it. And I think some of the presentation is a rearward glance, and we shouldn't lose sight as an industry of what we've actually achieved. And the people who have achieved it are the people who are in this room and some of the people who are in the bar laughing at the people who are in this room. But we will include them in our thoughts and prayers. So what I will touch on is the potential impact on the supply chain, but I will do it quickly because I think for staying here at the bitter end, we all deserve to join everybody else in the bar, so I will flick through these quickly. This is where I got to in terms of the 2015 presentation and what I felt back then market change actually meant. And this was exactly the same conference. This was March 2015. And if you read through those, it doesn't look wildly different to March 2019. You could argue some of the issues have moved on a little. DS3 rollout is finally getting to a place where we can call it a rollout. All the others are essentially the same. Obviously, we have now migrated to ISAM, and we're dealing with the issues associated with that. But a lot of the others are still the same issues. Now, you can throw other things in, and people have mentioned earlier about constraint and curtailment and so on. But the basic issues are all quite similar. So have the challenges changed in 4 years? Not particularly. I think a lot of them are the same, and it goes back to Donald's slide. The three pillars, or the three legs of the stool, tend to be the same. There are other things around the edge, but the main ones tend to be grid, market, and planning. And at the moment we have issues with all of them. I think the reassuring thing for everybody, myself included, is that there is a move towards improved versions of all of the three. And I'd like to think that in 2023, when I'm standing here again, I was going to say with even less hair. I don't think I can have less hair. Probably an even bigger belly and even more lines on my face. We'll be looking back fondly at where we are today. The conclusion I came to in 2015, again, looks very similar to where we are today, albeit the context is very different. And I just highlighted the one thing that when I did look back, it was the first thing that jumped out at me. In March 2015, talking about the challenges facing the supply chain, the one that really jumped out at me in 2015 wasn't what we had to do immediately, because knowing people in the supply chain, and when I say the supply chain, I don't mean contractors and consultants, it's everybody. Everybody has a role to play in delivering what we do. It's banks, it's legal advisors, it's air grid and networks we mentioned earlier, it's local councils, it's roads engineers. There's a whole range of people who have to do it. But in terms of the more traditional supply chain, the question we were really being asked is, would we invest in capacity to deliver the Refit 2 challenge? And the one thing that, and I did talk to a few others in the supply chain before I presented 4 years ago, that was the main issue. Yes, we will do it, and yes, we will invest, but we need to have visibility of what's coming after, because a number of us, unfortunately, have been in the industry for far too long, and we've seen the boom-bust cycle. A lot of us would have been there in sort of 2003, when we thought we were doing wonderful things, and then there was a grid moratorium and everything stopped. Then we built things in the late 2000s to be faced with grandfathering and a couple of other industry issues that stopped everything in 2011. And we were reassured that this wouldn't happen again. Unfortunately, well, let us see what happens. I don't think we're getting into those territories again, but it's not as positive as we thought it would be when we were thinking about this in 2015. Back in 2015, I didn't have the PowerPoint skills to add the audio clip. I just had that. I probably didn't look at the context being a city boy. Ploughing time again probably means you're at the end of the harvest, so it was probably the wrong thing to say, but the next line in the song is probably even more relevant, so perhaps I had some degree of foresight. It's unlikely given that it's me we're talking about, but there is a chance. So in terms of where we are now, if you list the same things that I listed in 2015, it's amazing how it is essentially the same. It's saying, I was kind and said same stuff, different day. Back then I said the industry is entering a critical phase. We are again. It's been defined very differently. It's been defined in terms of the various auction processes. There was a lot of talk this morning in relation to RES and corporate PPAs, and that's been talked to death. But I think we all know that it is a different environment we're moving into. The supply chain will be under pressure again, but as I said, for very different reasons. Back in 2015, it was all about resourcing up and building up. And I remember sitting on the panel afterwards, and someone asked a question from the floor in relation to, well, as the supply chain, should you be engaging with universities to make sure graduates are coming out with the right skills? That was the sort of mindset that people had in 2015. We're now facing a different pressure, which is how do we retain the experience and knowledge that we have to make sure that when the challenges face us in RES and corporate PPAs and whatever might be coming, that what we've learned as a group over the last 4 years and the years going before are there when we need it, because we are going to need it over the next few years. Again, I said we were mature enough to deliver, and I really believed it, and thankfully it's proven to be the case. But there's no point in going through that 4 years if we can't now use that experience to get us through what is going to be a difficult phase. Because be under no illusion, it is a difficult phase we're going into. We're all going to be challenged to do things better and more efficiently. It's been touched on in different ways. And I think it's going to be a far more difficult challenge than Refit 2, but for very, very different reasons. But I'm really convinced that the people in this room have the skills to do it. Again, that goes without saying, and I'm not sure if you can see the sad face. Yes, I think you can see the sad face. I think, again, there's no difference from 2015, albeit the context is very different. The reference there, I think, in terms of realism and pragmatism, was more about efficient use of resources, because if the supply chain was going to be under pressure to deliver a lot in a short space of time, well, then we had to do it better. We had to be more efficient. I'm not sure whether we achieved that. I think we did to a degree, but I think now we're moving into a slightly different place. And I think one of the things, and it was mentioned on one of the sessions this morning, that we really need to think about is, and it has been talked about, but I'm not quite sure we've cracked what it is, it's early engagement with the supply chain. Now, I think each element of the supply chain probably has a different version of what that means, but I think what it does mean is probably making some commercial commitments earlier. That could be buying pieces of consultancy work earlier. It could be a strategic alignment with a supplier of turbines or whatever it might be. But I think it's changing how we would have done things. This isn't Refit 2 again. This is a slightly different world. My presentation back in the day, for those of you who've got good memories, most of it, or certainly a significant portion of it, dealt with this. It was the human interactions and how we manage people. Because one of the things I was very conscious of in our business is people assume as technical consultants that the largest part of our job is dealing with technical problems. It's cable sizing, it's foundation designs, it's whatever it might be. It's not. That is the context within which we do everything. And we have all those skills in abundance. The largest part of our job is managing human interactions. It may be in a technical context, it may be in a client context, it may be in a commercial context, but it is managing those human interactions. And there was a lot of talk this morning about what the future needs to be. The EirGrid ESB Networks relationship was used as an example. Mark Foley, unfortunately, was put under a little bit of pressure that I think he dealt with very well. But the message coming back from a lot of the presentations was collaboration. And collaboration, I think, is what we need. And it is about managing the relationships between us all for a common goal, which I think was someone gave the definition this morning. This was also something that I put up, and it was something that a friend of mine is in the biopharma industry, and one of the things we've done over the years is got people from outside of our industry to give short presentations to staff, just to give them probably a break from our own trials and tribulations, but also to give them a window into what other people are doing in other industries. And my pal from biopharma was talking about, at the time he was working in Grange Castle for Pfizer, and he was saying, people assume that the investments in biopharma in Ireland are all about tax. And that plays a significant factor. But once that investment is made, it's all about being the best. And it's not about being the best in an Irish context, it's being the best in a global context. Because if they don't deliver against the parameters that are set by them internationally and globally, the facility will be moved to someone or some other country that can do it. So the focus of people like Pfizer and others in that industry is about being the best in the world. And the point I was making 4 years ago was that that's where I thought we needed to be. Why shouldn't we challenge ourselves as the supply chain to be the best in the world? Looking back, you can argue whether we did or didn't achieve that. I think we did a bloody good job, and I think the proof of that is in some of the prices that are being paid in the secondary market for some of the assets that are being sold. And I think we can all pat ourselves on the back, we can give ourselves awards and everything else. The proof of most of these things is euro, or sterling, or dollars, or whatever it might be. And I think if the financial community is valuing the assets we've built over the last number of years to the degree that they are, I think it reflects incredibly well on all the people in the room. And it's not, again, this is not about the supply chain being fantastic. This is about all of us. You know, the supply chain can only build what's put in front of them. So if the projects are flawed, the projects are poor because developers haven't done their jobs, the assets at the end will be similarly flawed and poor. This is exactly what I had on the first slide. If you remember, it's a time for positivity, and remember, that's the line that follows the previous one. And that probably has more relevance now than the line did 4 years ago. I think this is exactly where we are. We can look out into the field, and you know, the guys have put some slides up about, especially brines, in terms of, you know, numbers of gigawatts and all of that. But I think where we stand today looking forward, it is hard to know where the projects will be and when they will be, but we know they are there. The challenge for all of us is to make sure that when they come, we, and I do mean all of us, are ready to seize that opportunity. It was very easy 4 years ago, albeit it looked very difficult. I think it's a different challenge now. So what does all that look like? You know, it's kind of stating the obvious, and most of the things I've said already, but it's really about trying to retain the competence, the experience, the understanding that we have to help the development community solve what is a very difficult challenge. And there was reference this morning to corporate PPAs and the levels they need to be at to interest some of the people that Gary Connolly represents in Host in Ireland. And you know, that is a challenge. Let's be under no illusion. It is a challenge. And if the government thinks that corporate PPAs is really the future and we don't have to worry about RES, I think they're going to get a rude awakening very quickly. I was at a session in, again, similar to this, in London late last year, and I think it was Mike O'Neill was on the panel, and someone raised the question about corporate PPAs, and Mike's comment was, there are more breakfast briefings in relation to corporate PPAs than there are corporate PPAs. And you know, that struck with me with all the stuff that we've heard subsequently. In terms of the supply chain, and I don't want to talk this up too much, but I think, you know, sharp peaks have their challenges, but I think potential cliffs, or certainly we'll call it a slope, is more challenging for all the obvious reasons. We've already had some casualties along the way, both on the supply chain side and unfortunately on the client side. So, you know, this is not without its risks. And as I said, what RES is going to need from us, you could argue that a lot of Refit 2 was about perspiration. It was about doing lots of stuff and doing it quickly to a high standard and safely and all of that, but it was about doing a lot. I think initially the stuff around RES is going to be more around inspiration. It's about using the knowledge we've built up to deliver projects in this new environment. And as I said already, to retain that expertise that we have. To give ourselves as an example, and again, this is I don't really want to talk about us too much, but just to give you a sense of what this has meant. I gave this the original presentation in March 2015. At that stage, we had delivered 700 megawatts as owner's engineer, completed projects. In the 4 years since then, we've added another 1,000 megawatts in terms of completed projects. So, you know, that is hugely significant for us as a business. It's been great for us, but it's almost like a barometer. It's like the M50 barometer for economics in the country. And again, I'm not talking ourselves up, but you know, that's the scale of increase that we've had to deliver as supply chain, you know, across the board. So how are we adapting to post-Refit 2? I've already mentioned the opening of the Scottish office, so we're trying to export our skills and expertise to there. Seems a strange time to be doing it with Brexit. So our Brentry strategy in times of Brexit is a challenge, but I think it's been very positive. We're getting into a lot more strategic advice, people looking to us to say, well, you're in the center of all this. Where is this going to go? Can you help us? Can you give us some insight? One of the things we're also doing is partnering with other sort of similar-minded companies, because what we're seeing is some of the opportunities span a range of different areas. It could be technical and market, for example. We don't have market skills. We're working with a company who does, and we can offer an integrated service. And we present it as an integrated service to the client. So the client doesn't go for two separate consultants and then try to manage them themselves, which can be a nightmare. And another thing, and again it was mentioned earlier, is hybrid projects. Hybrid can mean, people tend to think in terms of batteries and so on, but it can also mean multiple generation sources on the same site. So again, how do we get more value from the electrical infrastructure that's there? Well, you use it more is the basic thing. And I suppose the key message, and I'm sure if you talk to the other supply chain people, you know, touch wood, we will be here. We're certainly doing everything in our power to make sure we're here. And when RES does come, we'll be ready for it, as will a lot of people in the room. But again, I'm conscious of time, I've already gone over. So, you know, one thing we shouldn't forget is this was the sort of numbers that were being presented back in 2015 in terms of RES. The big year was supposedly 2017, which was going to be nearly 1,400 megawatts against a baseline of about 200 megawatts a year up to that point. I remember saying that the one thing I can guarantee is we won't be doing this because it's the usual optimistic view of the market. But the message was the step increase. It wasn't the specific numbers. In terms of what's actually happened, and these are somewhat estimated at the moment and a bit of a projection for 2019, the blue is the original projection from IWEA and the orange is what we've actually delivered. And the key thing is the step increase was delivered. And it was delivered in a very, very professional way by us all. And you know, I think that is a cause for celebration for everybody. This was something that I put up at the time because, again, it was quite a concerning time. I think everybody was very worried. The point I was making was it's never going to get any better than it is today. And when we're looking back, these are the days we'll remember when it was all about how do we build all these things. I have a funny feeling that in a couple of years' time, when we're looking back, we may recognize the time now as being the start of when the next chapter really started to align. And I'm somewhat reassured by Paddy Hayes and Mark Foley having a bit of a love in this morning, and hopefully more conversations like that will help us as we go forward. So in conclusion, this is a big headache. Collaboration is the key. We do need to retain those skills we have. We also need to evolve into whatever the market needs. But let's take a moment. I think personally, and on behalf of others, that what we've done in Refit 2 is an astounding achievement by us all. We all should be very proud, you know, not little pockets patting themselves on the back. I think it also proves that as an industry, on a global basis, we can deliver. And for once, and it's something we don't do very well, we did a little bit of it back in January, I suppose, but we tend not to celebrate our achievements as an industry. So tonight I'm going to party like it's 2019. Thank you.